Okay. Is the screen shared?
It is shared, Bhante. It has some Chinese reader 8 stand.
Let me stop the share and start again. Okay, is it shared now?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay. Okay, so this is the session of Saturday morning, starting the 10 o'clock session. And so we can begin again with the verse of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everyone. And now we are ready to move into the substance of our presentation. And so last night I laid out the general scheme that underlies the path of purification. And now we're going to be moving into chapter 18 on purification of view. But first, the root text undertakes a short overview of what has been accomplished and what lies ahead. So it speaks about, if you remember, we have these 7 stages of purification. So it calls the first 2 purifications, purification of virtue or of good conduct, and purification, here he uses the word consciousness, but the word is Cheetah. He calls this the roots. And then he gives definitions. And then we have to remember that this is explaining these in relation to a monastic person. So he explains purification of virtue to be the purified fourfold virtue of good conduct, beginning with restraint according to the Patimokkha being the code of monastic rules. And then this is dealt with in the first 2 chapters of the text. And then comes the second purification, is purification of Cheetah, of mind. And this is explained as the 8 attainments together with access concentration. So the 8 attainments are the 4 jhanas. And then beyond the 4 jhanas, there are 4 arupa attainments, formless or immaterial attainments. The base of infinite space, base of infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, and base of neither perception nor non-perception. So those are the 8 attainments. And then there's a stage of concentration that is approaching the jhanas, but not yet deep and strong enough to count as jhana. And that is called in Pali access, or in English it's translated as access concentration. In Pali, the word is upachara samadhi. So this is the concentration that we could say is in the neighborhood of jhana concentration, but not yet strong enough and deep enough to count as jhanic concentration. Okay, now there's a little problem that arises. Well, let me just continue before I come to that problem. Okay, so those are the first two purifications, which had been dealt with earlier in the text. The development of samadhi has been dealt with in detail from chapters 3 to chapters 13. And now we come to the 5 purifications that are comprised under the heading of panya, or wisdom. So this is purification of view, by overcoming doubt, by knowledge and vision of what is the path and not the path, purification by knowledge and vision of the way, and purification by knowledge and vision. So those are the trunk of the tree. If we compare the path to liberation to the tree, this is the trunk. Okay, now the text is going to make a distinction between two types of practitioners, two types of meditators. So the Pali words for these are samatha, yanika, and vipassana yanika, sometimes called Sudha Vipassana Yanika. The word samatha is what we translate as serenity, calm, calmness, tranquility, serenity. And yana is a vehicle. And one who travels by a particular vehicle is called yanika, say a traveler. So one who travels in the vehicle of serenity is called the samatha yanika, and one who travels in the vehicle of insight is called the vipassana yanika. Now, in a way, these two designations are a little bit misleading, because in order to gain liberation, samatha, serenity or concentration alone is not sufficient, but rather the distinction between them is that the samatha yanika is one who makes the attainment of deep samadhi the basis or foundation for developing insight, whereas the vipassana yanika is one who proceeds to the development of insight without developing concentration to the level of either the jhanas or even access concentration. And this raises a little bit of a problem or a question. This question came up last night, and that is, it's said that each stage of purification is the basis or foundation for the next one. So to proceed to purification of view, it would seem that one needs purification of mind, Cheetah Visuddhi. And yet purification of mind is explained as the 8 attainments, the jhanas and the formless meditations, together with access concentration. So how can a vipassana yanika meditator start to develop vipassana insight without achieving purification of mind? How can he start developing purification of view without having purification of mind? Okay, the answer to this question that's proposed by the commentaries and sub-commentaries is that there is another type of concentration that develops in the process of contemplating phenomena for the development of insight. This kind of concentration is called Kanika Samadhi, which is translated as momentary concentration. The word kana means a moment, and so kanika is momentary. And even though we use the word Kanika Samadhi, momentary concentration, it doesn't mean that this concentration lasts only for a single moment and then the mind becomes distracted again. Rather, this is a kind of concentration that arises as one is contemplating with mindfulness the ever-changing stream of bodily and mental phenomena. And so the object of momentary concentration is always changing because bodily and mental phenomena are always changing from one moment to the next. But in Kanika Samadhi, the mind is focused, concentrated unshakably on the stream of ever-changing phenomena. But because those phenomena, the mental and material phenomena, each one lasts only for a moment, and so the mind is mindful of those phenomena, each phenomena only for one moment, while that phenomena arises and passes. But in observing the ever-changing phenomena, the concentration is constant and unwavering. So though it's called momentary concentration, it doesn't mean one is concentrated for one moment, then one is distracted again, but rather one is concentrated on this momentary phenomena, then the next momentary phenomena, the next momentary phenomena, and so on in continuous succession. And so this concentration is similar to access concentration, but it differs from access concentration because in access concentration, the mind remains fixed on a single object, for example, on the in and out breathing, or on a kasina object, a colored disc, or on an emotional state like loving kindness or compassion, whereas momentary concentration takes as its object the ever-changing phenomena of bodily phenomena and mental phenomena, each lasting only for a single moment. And now I want to go to some texts which form the basis for this, first for this distinction of samatha yanika and vipassana yanika, and then which support or which confirm the validity of this concept of momentary concentration. We don't find the expressions samatha yanika and vipassana yanika in the suttas themselves. And also we don't find momentary concentration or access concentration in the suttas themselves. These are terms that are introduced in works like the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries. But we find a basis for this distinction of Samatha Yanika and Vipassana Yanika in a sutta that comes in the Anguttara Nikaya. This is in the Book of Fours, sutta number 170. So here the Venerable Ananda is speaking, and he makes a distinction between, first we have a monk who develops serenity first and insight afterwards. So he develops samatha first, then vipassana, using serenity, samadhi, as a basis for vipassana. So as he is developing serenity first and insight afterward, then the path arises. He pursues this path, develops it, and cultivates it. And as he is doing so, then the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies, the tendencies of the defilements, are uprooted. So this, we could say, is the canonical basis for the idea of the samatha yanika that we find in the suttas, in the commentaries. And the usual, in the typical presentation of the stages of the path that we find in the suttas, the stages, for example, we looked at last night, we have sila, samadhi, panya. And so the usual model is based on the concept of the samatha yanika. One proceeds from good conduct to develop deep samadhi, and then from that deep samadhi, one proceeds to develop insight and wisdom, and then gains liberation. But in this sutta, we find a different sequence presented in the second type of meditator. So this is the case of the practitioner who develops insight first and serenity afterwards. And then as he is doing so, the path arises, he pursues and develops that path, and as he does so, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies of defilements are uprooted. So this is the canonical basis for the idea of the Vipassana Yanika. And then we find an explanation of this, a more detailed explanation of this in some of the commentaries. And so here I take a commentary to the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 3. This is called the Dhammadayada Sutra. And so here the commentator explains, first he takes the one who develops serenity first and insight afterward. Okay, so how is this done? Here somebody arouses either access concentration or absorption concentration. By absorption is meant the jhanas, or beyond the jhanas, the formless meditation. So that is samatha, that is serenity. And then one sees with insight, one contemplates with insight the factors that constitute that jhana as impermanent, as dukkha, as bound up with suffering, and as non-self. That is insight. So in this way, first comes serenity, afterward insight, and then the rest is the same as in the sutta that we just discussed. Okay, then we come to the Vipassana Yanika. So it's said here that somebody does not arouse the aforesaid serenity, doesn't attain either the jhanas or even access concentration, but instead he contemplates with insight the five aggregates as impermanent, as dukkha, and is non-self. So that is insight. One begins directly with contemplating the aggregates in terms of the three characteristics. And then with the fulfillment of insight, as that insight matures, then one pointedness of mind arises, taking as object the relinquishing of the factors arisen therein. So that is serenity. And according to the sub-commentary, what is meant by the relinquishing of the factors is nibbana. So the serenity that's spoken of here is the samadhi that is associated with the world transcending path consciousness. So one moves through the stages of insight, and when insight reaches its peak, the world transcending path arises, and that path is focused unshakably upon nibbana as its object. That unshakable concentration in the path is serenity. Okay, so that is the way in which insight occurs first, followed by serenity. Okay, then for the idea of momentary concentration. Okay, when the commentary I just spoke to speaks about contemplating with insight, going directly into the contemplation of the five aggregates with insight, when actually the way this occurs is that one attends mindfully to one's immediate experience, to whatever is occurring in one's immediate experience. It doesn't mean that one sits down to meditate for the first time and starts observing the five aggregates, and then at once one starts to gain insight into impermanence, suffering, and non-self. But rather one has to begin by attending with mindfulness and with clear comprehension, with clear knowledge, whatever is occurring in one's present experience, in one's immediately present experience. So suppose the meditator sits down. The way this is usually done is by observing the rising and falling of the abdomen, or by attending to the breath in the area of the nostrils. But instead of aiming at one pointed concentration, one starts attending to the differentiation or distinctions in the experience. So observing the rising movement of the abdomen, distinguishing it from the falling movement. Again, the rising movement, the falling movement. If one hears sounds, one attends mindfully to hearing. If one feels pain, one attends mindfully to pain. If one is feeling aching in the body, one attends to aching. If there's a tingling sensation, tingling. If memories arise, one attends and notes remembering. If planning occurs, one attends planning. So one notes mindfully whatever is occurring as it is occurring. And as one practices in that way, attending mindfully to the immediate present experience, the mindfulness is developing strength. And in that the strengthening of mindfulness, along with the strengthening of mindfulness, the power of concentration is also arising and developing. So as one goes on noting with mindfulness whatever is occurring in the present, concentration is present also, focusing one-pointedly on that present experience. So at first there will be many distractions, many moments of concentration, followed by moments when the mind becomes scattered and distracted and loses the concentration. But mindfulness repeated throughout the day, hour by hour, minute by minute, moment by moment, the mindfulness becomes more and more powerful. And as mindfulness gains in power, the concentration gains in power, so that the concentration remains unshakably fixed on whatever mental or material phenomena is being observed with mindfulness. And so here we have the sub-commentary to the Visuddhimagga speaks about momentary concentration. And it says that insight is impossible, let me see, without mundane concentration. It says supramundane concentration and insight are impossible without mundane concentration and insight to precede them. And then it says that without the access and absorption concentration in one whose vehicle is serenity, or without the momentary concentration in one whose vehicle is insight, the supramundane, that's the supramundane paths and fruits, can never be reached. And then further speaking about momentary concentration, here it calls this momentary unification of the mind. And it says that this is concentration lasting only for a moment. So it seems just from that statement that the concentration arises for one moment, then it's lost. But the next sentence indicates that that is not the case, but rather it's said that this concentration occurs uninterruptedly on its object in a single mode. So it's a continuous concentration focusing on its object, the object arising and passing away from moment to moment. But the concentration itself is uninterrupted. And when it remains fixed, when it remains following the object uninterruptedly, then it fixes the mind immovably on the object as if in absorption. And so for the meditator who uses serenity as the vehicle, purification of mind, Cheetah Visuddhi, is achieved through attaining either access concentration or the jhanas, which constitute absorption concentration. But for one who follows the vehicle of insight, purification of mind is achieved by this momentary concentration. That concentration which is ever changing from moment to moment, but which fixes the mind uninterruptedly and immovably on its object as if in absorption. And it's through that momentary concentration that the actual insight knowledges arise. Okay, maybe at this point, as I said, from time to time, I'll pause and take some questions. So now we could take some questions. Let's see how this works. Then I have to go to, where are the, okay, the participants. Okay, I see Sud. You unmute yourself.
Thank you, Bhante. One question is, in Samatha Yanika, do you need to attain jhanas to go through the Samatha Yanika, or can it just be access concentration?
No, it can be access concentration.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, okay, you're wrong. You're wrong. Yeah, you have to, okay.
Wait, Bande, for momentary concentration, if I understand correctly, the concentration is continuous, but the object is changing because the phenomenon is quickly changing from moment to moment. I assume that that understanding is correct.
Yes, that is correct.
If so, how can there be concentration if there's not one pointedness of mind? If the mental phenomenon, the mind is attending on changing phenomenon, how can there be one pointedness of mind?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what is stated in the subcommentary, that the mind occurs without interruption on its object in a single mode. That is, it's continuously observing the object. And so the mind is fixed immovably on the object as if in absorption. So that is a kind of one-pointedness, but it's not the one-pointedness of samatha meditation. In samatha meditation, one-pointedness is achieved with a single object. But here the object is changing, but the mind is continuously observing and noting the changing object. So that continuous noting is, in fact, the one-pointedness. Okay, Ellen Varela.
Thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to have a distinction between concentration and mindfulness, please.
Okay. It's a little bit difficult to formulate this in words, but let us say that mindfulness is making the object present to the mind, and concentration is fixing the mind or focusing the mind onto the object. The two are associated very, very closely so that it's often hard to distinguish them. But let us say that with mindfulness, one makes the object clearly present to the mind, and so one is aware that the object is present to the mind, whereas concentration is that particular function that fixes the mind on the object and doesn't let the mind be dispersed or scattered or distracted from the object. Maybe that's the best I could do with distinguishing them. Okay, Yoland?
Yes, Svante. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. it's the same topic, momentary unification of the mind. Okay, in the momentary unification, you're focusing on objects, focusing on thoughts that are changing. I'll call them thoughts, but they're changing all the time. But in the concentration, do you become so highly concentrated that it loses the movement from one thing to another? Can you change to, because, do you understand what I mean?
I think I understand what you mean. Okay, in the state of momentary concentration, well, as the mindfulness becomes stronger and the concentration becomes stronger along with it, generally one will have the same ever-changing object present to the mind. For example, if one is taking as the fundamental object, the root object, the arising and falling of the abdomen, one will be observing unchangeably, consistently, the rising movement and the falling movement, but one will be noting the constant changes within each rising and each falling of the abdomen.
Okay.
Occasionally, just other objects will appear, like, say, one is observing the rising and falling, then pains will arise in the leg, say. One will note the pain and then bring the mind back to the rising and falling. Or if the pain becomes persistent, one might drop the abdomen and just focus on the pain and watch the ever-changing process of the painful feeling, watching the painful sensations arise and pass away.
And this is the Cheetah Visuddhi?
That will count as Cheetah Visuddhi for the Vipassana Yanika.
Okay.
Okay, Belinda, and then this will have to be the last question because we have to get back to the main topic. Okay, Belinda.
Bhante, thank you so much. I have two related questions. So,
I think you'll have to just choose one.
oh,
Yeah, of course, we have to limit it.
So are these two types of meditators, Samatha Yanika and Vipassana Yanika, equally valid? Is there an opinion on which one should start with or pursue? And just a clarification, are these both under purification of virtue, purification of mind or view, and the ordering of it?
Okay, you did ask two questions there. Okay. Okay, the first question, are they equally valid? I say that they're equally valid because they relate to people of different temperaments. Though the model of the Samatha Yanika is the more classical model that we find conforms better to the general sequence of the stages, or the general layout of the stages that we find in the suttas, where we have samadhi first, followed by panya. But the teaching, I would say that the teaching is broad enough to be able to accommodate those practitioners who incline more to proceed more directly to the development of insight, rather than to devote more time to developing deep samadhi. Okay, I see Kenneth. Oh, we'll just take your question. If it's a simple one, then I'll have to go back to the text.
Yes, Bhante. This is actually very, very similar to the question that was just asked. Once you pick one style or one path, is it advisable to switch, or how do you go about figuring out which path to pick between the vehicle of serenity and the vehicle of insight?
I would say usually one experiments with different, say, choosing different meditation teachers and different meditation techniques till one finds one that resonates with oneself and that one feels like this is the type of practice that I feel most comfortable with and that works best for me. among, say, contemporary meditation teachers, different meditation systems. I'd say now the most prominent advocate of the Samatha Yanika mode of practice is the Burmese master Pa Auk Soyador and the teachers in his lineage. And the most prominent exponent of the Vipassana Yanika approach, or maybe the two most prominent, would be Mahasi Soyador, who's passed away, of course, but the teachers in his lineage and the lineage descending from Uba Kin, of whom Goenka is now, well, Goenka has also passed away. The Goenka lineage is also a somewhat different approach to the Vipassana Yanika system. Okay, we're going to have to return now. I'm sorry, other people have their hands raised, but you get priority during the next question period. Because now we want to go back to our text. Okay, so now we're going to come to the third purification, which is called Purification of View. And this marks the beginning in the development of Panya. All the stages that follow are stages in the development of Panya or wisdom. And so purification of view is defined as the correct seeing of mentality, materiality. Do you see the Pali text that I just clicked on?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay. So in Pali, this is called Nama Rupanang. The Nama is what is Nyanamoli Bhikkhu translated as mentality. Rupa is materiality. So these are mental and material phenomena. And Yatava is correct or accurate. Dasanang is seeing. So this is the correct or accurate seeing of mental and material phenomena. So that is purification of view. And now the text is going to explain in detail how this is done. Okay, it begins with the practitioner who uses serenity as the vehicle. So this practitioner enters into any jhana, whether the four jhanas or the immaterial formless attainments, except the fourth, the base of neither perception nor non-perception, which is too subtle, too fine to be discerned clearly. So one enters into that samadhi, then one emerges from it. And so now the mind is very, very refined, very sharp and subtle. And then one discerns, distinguishes, perceives the jhana factors within that attainment and the other mental factors constituting that attainment, feeling, perception, and the other states. And then one defines them or labels them all as mentality or nama. And it says in the sense of bending. That is because when the mind cognizes an object, metaphorically, it's said to bend towards the object. And so the Samatha Yanika usually begins by discerning first the mental phenomena that constitute the jhanic experience, sort of in the jhana, the mind is just absorbed in that blissful or tranquil attainment. But now one emerges and starts investigating that jhanic attainment and seeing that even though it seems like one solid block when one is immersed in it, but when one emerges and looks back on it, one can start seeing within that jhanic experience a multiplicity of factors that constitute the jhana, a multiplicity of mental factors. And those all come under the heading of nama, mentality. And then one starts to discern, to recognize that those mental phenomena are not occurring just suspended in space, but they are occurring on the basis of the physical organism. And according to the commentarial way of explanation, mental phenomena occur supported by what is called the heart base. It's the matter of the heart, but it's not the heart organ the way we ordinarily think of it, but it's said to be a subtle kind of matter that occurs in the region of the heart. So first one sees the heart base, which is the support for the mental process of the jhana. And then one sees the other material phenomena, the primary elements, that is the earth element, liquid element, heat element, and air element, and the various other kinds of secondary matter that are based on the primary element. And so one distinguishes these material phenomena and one brings them all together under the general heading of rupa, or materiality. And so now one has dissected and analyzed that jhanic experience into the mental side, that is the jhanic experience itself, the multiplicity of mental factors, and then the material phenomena of the body on which the mental process occurs. And so one has distinguished the jhanic experience by way of mentality and materiality, and one joins them together, see that the whole experience consists in mentality and materiality, nama-rupa. So that is the procedure for the one who makes serenity the vehicle, the samatha yanika. Now we come to the one who takes pure insight as the vehicle, though also the one who takes serenity as the vehicle can also proceed in this way. They don't have to begin with analyzing the jhanic experience, but they could also proceed in the same way that the vipassana yanika meditator proceeds. So the one who uses pure insight as the vehicle usually has to begin by first discerning, perceiving, investigating the four elements. One could do it in brief or in detail. So the brief way is to take just the individual characteristics of the elements and then perceive them sort of globally or totalistically in the body. So one takes the earth element, has the characteristic of the distinctive characteristic of hardness or solidity, or on the other side, softness. And so one scans the body and perceives how this hardness and softness pervade the entire body. And as the mindfulness becomes sharper and more subtle, one could actually see almost at the molecular level or cellular level this element of hardness and softness pervading the entire body from the top of the head to the soles of the feet. Then the water element is usually taken last because it's the most subtle. So one would next go to the fire element or heat element, which has the property on the strong side of heat or hotness, on the negative side, coolness. And again, one investigates the body, scanning the body to pick up the sensation of heat or coolness throughout the body, distinguishing the entire body from top to bottom by way of hotness and coolness. And one defines that as the fire element, either in excess or deficiency. Then the air element or wind element is made known as the property of motion, expansion and contraction, and of pressure. So one might be observing the expansion and contraction of the chest, the rising and falling of the abdomen, or the pressure that extends throughout the body. And then from that gross expansion and contraction of the breath of the abdomen or the chest, one investigates the entire body and one can discern some degree of expansion and contraction occurring everywhere throughout the body. So in that way, one is seeing the air element or wind element throughout the entire body. And then the water element or the liquid element is the most subtle character of the four elements. That is said to have the characteristic of cohesion, that which binds all of the particles of the body together. And so one investigates the body, seeking the sensory correlate of that sense of cohesion, the feeling of how the particles that constitute the body are bound together, cohere together to constitute the body. And then one defines that as the water element or liquid element. So that is the four elements in brief. And in detail, then one distinguishes different constituents of the body as representing the four elements. So to represent the earth element, one takes the solid parts of the body, like the hairs of the head, the nails, the teeth, the skin, the muscles, the nerves, the bones, and the organs, kidneys, heart, liver, and so forth. All of that one distinguishes the earth element, because there the earth element is most prominent. The liquid element we can see most prominently in the phlegm, the sweat, the blood, the fat, the different fluids of the body. The heat element one sees in the heat of the body, which manifests in different ways. And then the air element or wind element, one could see most distinctly we could take the in and out breathing and in the different currents of, we say the nerve currents extending through the body. The Visuddhimagga then will develop this in a great deal of detail, using the full apparatus of the Abhidhamma to explain how to contemplate the material phenomena in the body. But in my own experience, the experience of many meditators, it's not really necessary to go into so much detail. But if you want, you can read these sections, but I don't have to explain them. Okay, so that is how one contemplates the material phenomena of the body. And then based on the material phenomena, one then discerns the immaterial or mental phenomena. And again, the Visuddhimagga uses this rather complex Abhidhammic mode of explanation. But the way that I found most effective, and that the way that's actually explained within, say, the Mahasi system of practice, is after one clearly discerns the material phenomena, then one attends to the mental side of the experience. So for example, if one is using the rising and falling of the abdomen as one's primary object, so from the rising and falling of the abdomen, one proceeds to investigate the four primary elements and then the various secondary types of material phenomena: color, odor, taste, and so forth. Then, after one gets a clear discernment of the material phenomena, one proceeds to look at the mental side of the experience. So as one is observing the rising and falling of the abdomen, the actual body that one is observing, and the abdomen itself that's rising and falling, that is rupa. That is the material side of the experience. But there is the observation of the material side of the experience. And as one looks into that process of observation, one could start to distinguish that there is present a feeling. Sometimes there'll be pleasant experience. Maybe when the observation is going well, one will be enjoying it and delighting in it and feeling very happy. So that will be pleasant feeling. Sometimes if there is distraction or disturbing thoughts arise, there'll be unpleasant feelings, or sometimes in the body itself, strong painful feelings will arise. So that is the aggregate of feeling, pleasant feeling, painful feeling, much of the time just neutral feeling. Then there will be the actual perceiving of the rise and fall of the abdomen, or the perceiving of any other phenomena that impinges on the mind. That is sanya, the perception. So that is the aggregate of perception. Then there is always the intention to keep the mind on the object, to note whatever object arises. There is the volition, the intention, and that will be the aggregate of mental formations, of which the most prominent component is cetana, intention or volition. And then in the background, there'll be an awareness of this. That is consciousness, the aggregate of consciousness. So that is how one is discerning and distinguishing nama-rupa, mentality, materiality, in regard to the awareness while sitting in meditation, while discerning the arising and falling of the abdomen. But one could also distinguish materiality and mentality very clearly when doing the walking meditation. And in fact, the walking meditation is often recommended as the most effective way to develop the discernment of mentality and materiality for the dry insight meditator, the one who takes bare insight as the vehicle. And so when walking back and forth, one will be following each step. So one is observing the body as it's taking each step. And so the body that one is observing, one sees the hardness and solidity of the body. That is the earth element. And one attends to the body while it's walking. One could discern the heat of the body, the fire element. The motion itself, the movement of lifting the foot, bringing the foot forward, putting the foot down, that movement of the body as manifesting the air element or wind element, which has one of its properties, that of motion. And then if one pays very close attention, one discerns the cohesion of the body. It's holding together of the body. That is the air element. That is the water element. And so in this way, one is discerning the four elements in the act of walking back and forth. Then one attends to the mental side of the experience. And here, the mental factor that stands out most clearly is that of volition. Before I come to that, I just have to take a quick pause and I will be back in a moment. I've learned the hard way that I shouldn't drink 2 cups of tea before the class starts. Okay, so when doing the walking meditation, the mental factor that stands out most clearly and distinctly is volition, because as one is attending to the act of walking with a very subtle, very sharp mind, one sees with each phase of each step, there is the intention or volition to take that step, to go through that phase. So when lifting, before lifting the foot, there is the intention to lift. To bring the foot forward, there's the intention to bring the foot forward. To put the foot down, there's the intention to put the foot down. Then to shift the weight, there's the intention to shift the weight. And then with the next step, the intention to lift, the intention to bring forward, the intention to put down, the intention to shift the weight. And so one is able to distinguish the mental side through intention, and the material side or physical side through the body that is engaged in the act of walking. And then looking more closely into the mental side, one realizes that with each step, one is experiencing a feeling, pleasant feeling, even a subtle painful feeling or a neutral feeling. One is perceiving each phase of each step, the aggregate of perception, and there is a general background awareness of the act of walking, the aggregate of consciousness. So in this way, one is distinguishing the act of walking into the mental and material phenomena. So in this way, one is getting a discernment or a distinction of experience, breaking up. Usually with our untrained consciousness, experience seems to occur as a kind of monolithic whole, a solid whole, undifferentiated whole. But when sitting and when walking with mindfulness and sampajanya, with clear comprehension, one is starting to see how the experience is constituted of a material side and a mental side, and that the material side consists of the 4 different modes or properties of matter: solidity, cohesion, heat or cold, and then motion, expansion, and contraction. And the mental side consists of feeling, perception, the intentions or volitions and other associated mental factors, and the background awareness, which is consciousness. And so that apparent uniformity or solidity of the experience is now distinguished into a multiplicity of components, material and mental components. The Visuddhimagga treats this in a great deal of detail, using different schemes. It uses the 18 elements, the 12 sense bases, the 5 aggregates. Yeah, I've actually just, the way I've explained, I've used the 5 aggregates as the basis, though in a somewhat simpler way. And then using a very brief definition based on the 4 primaries. Okay, and what's important from the standpoint of the dry insight meditator, the one who takes vipassana as the vehicle, is that in order to get a clear distinction or the ability to clearly distinguish and perceive the mental constituents, one should begin with the material side of the experience, analyzing the material factors, because it's said, for in proportion as materiality becomes quite definite, disentangled, and clear, so the defilements that are opposing the act of observation subside, and then the consciousness becomes clear, and then the immaterial states, the mental factors that have the material side of experience as their object, become clear of themselves. So one doesn't, in the dry insight approach, one doesn't begin directly with the mental side of experience, but rather one focuses initially discerning the material side, analyzing and distinguishing the different material factors of experience. And as the observation of the material side becomes clear, then the mind becomes more and more focused, the mindfulness becomes sharper, the concentration becomes stronger, and then the mental side appears more clearly and distinctly. Again, Visuddhimagga gives a great deal of detailed explanation. Okay, before I come to the next section, okay, so concluding, he says, if he undertakes the task of discerning the immaterial, that's the mental side, after he is already quite sure, quite confident about discerning the material side, then his meditation practice comes to growth, increase, and perfection. So one wants to ground the practice in observing the material side and then investigate the mental side only after the material side becomes clear and distinct. Okay, I will leave this section till later in the day. We'll take this maybe in the afternoon. So now I'll leave the rest of this period for questions. So any questions that come up, and I should give priority to the person, those I skipped over last time who might still have their hands raised. Okay, this is Shokuchi.
Thank you, Bhante. It's Shokuchi.
Shokuchi, okay.
I am just a little confused back from the beginning of today. Is Kanika Samadhi a kind of a subset of the Vipassana Yanaka, or is it another way? What is the relationship between this momentary concentration, moment by moment concentration? I'm sorry, do you
the relationship between the momentary concentration and the path of the Vipassana Yanika?
Yes. Is this
Okay.
a completely different path, or is it a
No,
subset?
no. The momentary concentration is the concentration that is developed by the Vipassana Yanika meditator. So the Vipassana Yanika meditator, to gain insight, has to have some concentration. It's not possible to gain real insight without concentration. But the Vipassana Yanika doesn't develop either excess concentration or absorption concentration of the jhanas, but rather the Vipassana Yanika begins by mindfully noting the ever-changing mental and material phenomena. And as that observation of the ever-changing phenomena gains strength and clarity, the mind becomes immovably focused on the changing phenomena from moment to moment. In that that uninterrupted focusing on the ever-changing phenomena is momentary concentration. And it's from that momentary concentration that the insight knowledges will arise. Does that make it clear?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, Gita? Unmute. Okay, please. Okay, Gita? Okay, wait, I'm not getting a voice. So Phyllis? Unmute.
Hi, Bhante, this is Phyllis.
Okay.
I have a question about how to observe feelings and perception. I find it very difficult to distinguish the two.
Feeling and perception.
Yeah.
Okay, feeling, the marks of feeling, let's say the clearest instances of feeling are painful feeling and pleasant feeling. There's also a neutral feeling, but neutral feeling is more subtle. So the way that one distinguishes feeling is either as pleasant or painful. And the way feeling becomes prominent in the usual course of meditation practice is when one is practicing extended periods for a long time. What will become prominent after a certain period of time is painful feeling in the legs, in the back, elsewhere in the body. So when we'll start to observe feeling through the painful feeling, this would be painful bodily feeling. Okay, but when the concentration starts to get good and the mind is able to remain steadily focused on the object, then one starts to feel happy and joyful. And then that happiness and even a bliss that arises, that is pleasant feeling. So in that way, one could distinguish this as the pleasant feeling. So that is in relation to meditation practice. But in everyday life, we could see when we feel painful feelings, if we get sick, we undergo bodily pain, aches and pains. If we're experiencing a pleasant sensation, we have a pleasant feeling. Say okay, let's take an example. Somebody likes ice cream, so they get a dish of ice cream. Let's say they like vanilla ice cream. So they take the scoop of ice cream and put it in their mouth. Okay, so when they're tasting the ice cream, then they have a pleasant feeling. So that is feeling. But they're observing or they note the particular flavor. This is vanilla ice cream. So that would be an example of perception. So perception is what we could say labels, conceptualizes, distinguishes the different aspects of our experience. That which applies labels, marks, concepts to the experience in order to sort of to interpret the experience and make the experience meaningful. So that is the work of perception. So does that make it clear?
So when I feeling pain,
Yeah.
like the act of calling that feeling pain, is that already perception?
We could say that perception would have a very prominent role when you note the feeling as being painful. That which is labeling the feeling as painful, that will be perception or occurring through perception. But the actual feeling of pain itself, or the actual pain itself, is feeling. So the labeling of the sensation is perception. The feeling of the sensation is feeling. Okay, I hope that makes it clear. Okay, Gita, do you want to ask your question now? Okay, so we're just not getting Gita. Okay, so we go to Namal.
Thank you, Bhante, for taking my question. My question is about the correct technique of walking meditation to optimize the contemplation of mentality and materiality.
Yeah.
Because depending on what you read, different instructors say widely differing things like walk at your normal pace, walk slowly, even about placing the soul on the ground. There are very different opinions. I was wondering if you could tell us something a little bit about it.
Of course, if I say, if I give my answer, then I give my opinion. Okay, my own sort of advice, say in doing the walking meditation, is to begin at a fairly normal pace. I mean, not like you're walking when you're out in the city, going to work, not at that rapid pace, but a slow, normal pace, and to begin with very broad observation. So the way I suggest is when taking a step, just note, say, the right step, and then the sensation of the right foot against the ground. Then when taking the left step, the attending to the step itself and the sensation of the left foot placed on the ground. So in this way, just two phases, walking at a fairly normal pace, a normal pace, the step and the touch on the ground, step and the touch on the ground. So one does that over some time until one's mindfulness improves. Then as the mindfulness, when it becomes clearer and sharper, then one can start breaking the step into 3 phases. And I make it for myself convenient by labeling each one with a word beginning with the letter P. Picking, that's picking up. Pushing, that's bringing forward. Putting down. Picking, pushing, putting. And then there are more refined ways of observing the act of walking, but I don't want to go into those details right now. I think we'll be coming to a more detailed approach later, probably tomorrow. We'll be taking that more detailed approach.
I see. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, maybe time for one more question if there is. Okay, this is Shan Jong Basher.
Thank you, Bhante. So if my understanding is correctly, it seems that the meditators who have achieved jhana first, when they start to discern on the inside meditation object, they started with the ultimate realities. For example, when you mentioned that they discern on the 5 jhana factors, it seems that they dive deep into discerning on these mental factors already. Yeah. While for meditators who start with insight meditation, it seems that they do not penetrate the compactness of the nama or rupa. They discern on the body movements or temperature or aggregational perceptions. It's still a little bit conceptual to me. I just wonder if my understanding is correct. Thank you.
Yeah, in a way that is the case, but also the meditator who is using insight as the vehicle is also aiming to get at what you call the ultimate realities, or let's say the constituent factors of experience, but because they lack the strong, powerful concentration of the samatha meditator, so they have to begin at a more conceptual level. But as the mindfulness and concentration gain in strength, then they go beyond the conceptual level to experience these factors directly and immediately.
Thank you, Bhante. So that means once they proceed to the purification of doubts and purification of path and non-path, their understanding should not be any different from meditators who achieve jhana first, because these pure insight meditators, they should have achieved more clear mind and powerful concentration by that time. Is that correct?
Partly, but I would say probably it's the case that the meditator who uses jhana as the basis is able to gain a more powerful and clearer perception of the mental and material phenomena because they have stronger concentration. So they're able to discern them at, let us say, more detailed and subtle levels.
Thank you.
Whereas the pure vipassana meditator requires more application, more vigor, more forceful application of energy in practicing insight.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, we could take one more question, and this will be coming from Suki. Suki? Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Bante?
go ahead.
Bante?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh. Going back to paragraph 5, 6, 7, there's like a section which says become plain, like a little bit. If you go back to number 5.
Wait, what paragraph are you referring to?
In the book, paragraph 5. All the way to the front, I'm sorry.
Okay, just read it.
Okay, it says like a head hair originated by karma there become plain.
Yeah.
And it's, now I kind of wonder the meaning of become plain.
It means become clear, become evident.
That's it?
Yeah, not plain in the sense of ordinary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are different, the word plain has different nuances.
Oh,
Here it means the same thing as evident, clear, or clear.
I thought something else was there.
No,
Okay.
no.
Thank
Okay,
you.
since that was a simple question, let's take Elena. That will be the last one. Elena will be the last one.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question and thank you for...
The sound is breaking up. I'm not getting the sound clearly. I'm not able to distinguish your voice. The sound is breaking into little packets.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I can't. The sound is breaking into distinct packets.
How about now?
A little better. Try. Try.
I was muted by the host. Okay. Can you hear me now, Bante?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Bante. Thank you for taking my question. So in the chapter of materiality, in section 8, it says that the supramundane kind of consciousnesses, however, are not discernible either by the one practicing pure insight or by one whose vehicle is serenity, because they are out of their reach. Can you please give us a little explanation on that paragraph?
I think what is meant here is that one doesn't practice insight on the supramundane states of consciousness. One practices insight on one's experience, either the jhanic experience or on the ordinary experience. Okay, the supramundane kinds of consciousness, however, are not discernible either by one who is practicing pure insight or by one whose vehicle is serenity. Let us just say that the point here is that when one is discerning, not when one is practicing to develop purity of view, one hasn't yet attained the supramundane states of realization. So one doesn't do insight on those states of consciousness.
Okay. So does that mean that you are still attaining higher, deeper levels of jhanic, concentration, or insight attainment, but you don't really focus on a supramundane or sort of like out-of-body kind of experiences or anything of that nature?
Yeah, the supramundane doesn't mean out-of-body experiences, but these are what they call the world transcending paths and fruits. And maybe I should just put that question aside because we haven't yet come to what's meant by the supramundane kinds of consciousness. So it might not be understood clearly what is meant. So I don't think we really have to worry about this point right now.
Okay, thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Now we're going to have to take the break. If anybody still has questions, they could save them for later. Okay, so let us now end the session for the morning, and then we come back. Let us see. You come back for your breakout groups at 1:30. And then some questions might arise in the breakout groups, and then I will have a Q&A section from 2:30 to 3. Okay, so thank you all for your attention this morning, and till we meet in the afternoon. Okay, so I will sign out, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. For the YouTube audience, we had a little technical difficulty at the beginning, so it was not live streamed at the beginning, but a little bit later, we'll actually upload the full lecture. So please check back. Okay, thank you, Bhante. We'll sign off too.